Hey 102 students, I thought I'd make another quick video solution going back to chapter 4, number 50. This is the one where we were doing the projectile motion stuff, and you might have had a little troubles with this because I didn't really say much about the center of mass. In fact, I might not have said anything because center of mass is covered in great detail in chapter 8. And so I kind of see why he throws this in there, and so I kind of want to talk about it. But, and I assigned it for the homework to kind of get you to think about it. But know this, center of mass is not on the exam. It'll be on the next exam because, like I said, this is really a deeper topic for rotations and getting into chapter 8. So we're going to see this more when we get into chapter 8. And this is just kind of a little teaser. So I don't do much with it. It just kind of prepped you for chapter 8, which also I'll prep you for chapter 8. That is the hardest of the first 8 chapters, maybe even the first 12 chapters. We eventually get to a harder chapter than chapter 8, but 8 certainly kind of sets the highest in terms of length and difficulty. Anyways, let's read number 50 here together. It basically says this. It says that you have a tennis ball on one end, okay, and they got it on the right, and a softball on the other end. And they're connected together by a light rigid rod, and they label some points. The middle point is B, one a little closer to the softball is A, and one closer to the tennis ball is C. It says, when this arrangement is thrown tumbling through the air, which of the labeled points is most likely to follow a parabolic path? Okay, so what we learned in this chapter was that if you were to toss something, and so if this is a grid system, a X and Y grid system, and you tossed it, it would follow a parabola. But what we didn't spend much time on, and are going to do a lot more of it in chapter 8, is that if your object has size, shape, dimension, whatever word you want to put there, let me say it's this crazy thing. So here's the softball, and then here's the tennis ball. There is a magical point that follows a parabola. The object itself may tumble around in a rotation. As this magical point called the center of mass follows the parabola. So all of our discussions really haven't given size to our object. And because we haven't given it size, we haven't let them actually rotate. And that's really what I want to explain here. And the whole reason why I think center of mass is maybe better to hold off a little bit until we get to chapter 8. But this is a good teaser. And so the point is, we've been learning things are going in a parabola, but our objects were like little tiny points. Or they were perfectly round, and we just said the center of it. But when they're not, perfectly round, and there's something like this, there will be a magical point called the center of mass. And the point here is to say, then, that as we get a little bit further, we can continue, when our objects have size, to say that they still follow a parabola. But the truth is only one point follows a parabola. The rest of the object then rotates around that magical point called the center of mass. So that's really what I wanted to say. And the second thing I wanted to say is, where is that center of mass? And they're trying to point out the center of mass is not the center of the object. So the center of mass is what in a math class we would call a weighted average. That is, we would take the objects that make up, or I guess the small objects that when put together make the big object. So in this case, I'll just call it 2 objects. So we'll have a tennis ball and a softball. And so tennis ball, softball. So over here where the tennis ball is, that's object 1. And over here where the softball is, that's object 2. And the rod connecting them, they said it's small and light. So they're just kind of letting us think about 2 objects. Now, if you just think about physical length, you would go, oh, well, the average is the middle between them. It's point B. And that is the average of their positions. That's true. But that is not what we call a weighted average. A weighted average is you give more credit to the heavier object. Your weighted average is kind of like how you would do your grades. You know, you may get an A on the final and maybe a C on a homework. That doesn't average to a B. That's not the middle of it. They're not equal. The final exam is worth way more than one homework. And so an A on the final and a C on one homework still averages just still an A, just barely a little bit less than the average of your final. So a weighted average then is you're doing a calculation where some things count more than the other. And in this case, what we will learn is mass of the object makes it contribute more. So if these 2 objects were of the same mass, then I would say they average to B. But given that a softball has more mass than a tennis ball, it's bigger, it's solid, a tennis ball is hollow and empty, then the average is going to be somewhere over towards A. Definitely not towards C. And definitely not in the middle B, but A. And we don't really have a formula to calculate it. In fact, in this class, we're not even going to be given a formula to calculate. We'll hold that off until your next class in Physics 121, and we learn a little calculus. But that's what this one is getting at. So I wanted to say those 2 things. I'll say them again. One, there is a magical point called the center of mass that will follow a parabola, and the rest of the object will rotate around it. So that's what we'll be talking about real soon going forward. Okay, and then of course the second thing was, in order to figure out that center of mass, you need to realize it's a weighted average. So more on this to come, and maybe I should say one more thing. Know then there won't be a center of mass question on this test. That would be more appropriate for next test, because the next test will have chapters 7 and 8, and I forget right now how far we go, but it definitely has the next ones. The one coming up now just has chapters 1 through 6. All right, hope that was helpful.